those who were so-called Hindus, Indians, Arabs, people from the Middle East, had more rights than the Negro. And even in the law, people who were Indian or Middle Eastern and such, they weren't considered white, but they also weren't black. So they were allowed to go places that blacks couldn't. And some practitioners, non-practitioners picked up on this. And there was one case that was actually used where a gentleman, a black man, was denied entry to this like high-end hotel or something like that. He was denied entry to a place because of the color of his skin, because he was black. And so he leaves and he comes back later on wearing a purple turban. And he's got this whole thing going on, and they let him in. Why? Because he fit this whole mystique that had been created about Indians, Hindus, them being magic men and so forth. So this mysticism that America, white America, had developed for Hindus then becomes something that is tapped into by the Hoodoo community. And so for such purposes as being able to go somewhere that without the turban, they wouldn't have been allowed. And then also gets picked up by the marketeers, because they see this mysticism of the Hindu, the yogi, the avatar, the blah blah, so forth, the God man. And then they co-opt this and apply it to Hoodoo, using now these Hindus, these Indians, as a selling point for selling these mystical Hoodoo products. You see? So they're using this mysticism to sell this mysticism. And then it gives birth to the guy with the turban in these Hoodoo advertisements, right? Selling you lodestone, selling you Solomon's seal, selling you, raccoon penis. Right? And so with this this influence now of what was really Indianism, because it wasn't like they brought over any of that wisdom from the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita or anything like that and said, yeah, let's bring this over into... It was the image itself of the Indian, this yogi, right? Because when they're talking about Hindus, they're talking about Indians, and they just associated this mysticism with this whole group of people. It could have been Muslim, but it was the image that mattered. You see? And so that's where we get a lot of this this mystique of like the hoodoo man, the hoodoo practitioner, the conjure woman being this fantastical being, and with this lavish kind of get up and so on. That comes from when these Hindu elements were adopted and brought into post-emancipation Hindu era, marketeering for selling products. And so they utilized this to sell themselves and to make themselves look more mysterious and powerful and so on. It was all marketing. It was all marketing. You see? And so from this era of marketeered Hoodooism, you have the image of the fabulous, mysterious looking Hoodoo practitioner, and you have these shops that began proliferating, you have the ads, you have the image of the Hoodoo practitioner, and even the way that they look. High John the Conqueror route, right? High John the Conqueror is some Swedish guy on a horse, wielding a sword. When in actuality, High John the Conqueror has been traced back to an African slave in Mexico named Gaspar Yanga. why is it always some non-African figure that's represented as John the Conqueror, High John the Conqueror? You know, all these marketing points, all these selling points. That's what it was all about. So this is when Hoodoo, because of this, becomes this marketeered product. Hoodoo becomes a product in post-emancipation era in the history of Hoodoo.
Is that necessarily a bad thing, or?
It was a bad thing as far as how much of it lost its authenticity and people not getting what they're paying for.
Right.
That's the bad thing. The good thing, it's able to spread, reach more people, and so on, under the guise of this mysticism. And of course, yeah, I mean, Hoodoo, conjure, is a mystical tradition. You know, conjure is a form of, could be looked at as a form of mystical, anti-establishment spirituality. You know, Hoodoo itself as a form of rebellion. But it didn't necessarily need, or certainly have, all these dings and bells about it. As a matter of fact, that in and of itself, in pre-emancipation, would have gotten you cut down, because you as a practitioner don't want that much attention.
Yeah. Correct.
Right? Yeah, and that history. Yeah, so then after that, first of all, are there any questions about post-emancipation and anything I just covered?
It's really interesting. Yeah, I'm still like picturing like the purple turban, you know, like telling me about it. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's very interesting. You know, somebody, I think it was also talked about how the one kind of like real like positive, subtle, underlying kind of element there was that it hearkened to, you know, these Indians, right? Hindus, but these Indians also subliminally pointed to the Native American Indians. And then so hence for some, it might have been like a connecting force between them and the Indians of North America. It's interesting to consider.
Yeah.
So now to get into healing, and then I'll get into the ancestor work as well, because I want to share some things with y'all. So as far as the healing, because as y'all know, the other classes, a part of this course, I'm going to be talking about these herbs, roots, and so forth, and how they work in Hoodoo, conjure, and so on, and give some workings for them. But then I'm also going to be talking about their medicinal uses, their therapeutic uses. You know, because I found that a lot of that, at least to a greater degree, is really lacking. You know, there are some that have, you know, maybe like a general knowledge, but there's no real grounding in it. You know,
As in plants and herbs that we can grow and like get outside and purchase and utilize for conjuring and hoodoo, or?
yeah, all the herbs I'm going to be covering are ones that they sell here, and so it's whatever their medicinal or interesting medicinal values are, I'm going to be covering that as well, so that you can actually use them to heal yourself, to prevent disease, and so on, in addition to their occult and spiritual uses.
Like for protection and stuff like that?
In this class?
Yeah, well, in the following classes, because I'm going to be, this is a 6-week course, and so I'm going to be teaching every night starting tonight at 8 p.m. on Tuesdays. Yeah, yeah. So I already talked a little bit about Native Americans and that connection there, and them learning and getting information from the people who are already here, and also just verifying with them some of the things that they may have suspected pertaining to certain plants and herbs and so on. And then also you know, how they treated themselves. You know, the captives, these slaves, these individuals, the laws around them, even being able to treat themselves, were so severe. I mean, it got to a point where blacks in America during this time, if a black person, if a Negro was found to be healing another slave, they would be punished by 50 lashes of the whip. That was the law. That was the law. So, besides the long-standing psychological impact of that, we also have to look at what did they do to go around that, right? So for those that had the knowledge and would still treat those around there, and hence also the word treater, you know, treaters. You hear that word in Hoodoo, treaters. You know, someone who is treating others, not just for spiritual ailments, but physical ones as well. Though having more knowledge generally in one or the other. And so you still had blacks healing, helping each other with herbs and roots that they could secret in, or they would apply out in some field where they may not have been under supervision or so forth, or where they had to go somewhere, grab something and bring it back with permission, and how they were able to use these plants and herbs, even to a point sometimes where their white master had to allow them. Like they would actually allow someone, if they were found to be proficient in healing with the use of herbs and so on, in some cases they would actually allow them to do it. It's rare, but there are cases where they would allow them, and actually one may actually become popular on the plantation with the with their owners and so forth. And it was after their remedies may have failed that they would then call in some other physician. And this is on top of the fact that the main physicians still would use knowledge that was informed by contact with Native Americans. But due to racism, they naturally had to put their knowledge down below their own. Even though in a European pharmacopoeia and a what could be called a Native American materia medica, you might have found similar uses for the same plant. Likewise, you had these Africans that were over here that had all this knowledge of plant usage from where they're coming from, and were able to then see how they could adapt it in their new environment. And then, should they have gained any type of first right to practice in the first place without being destroyed, and then two, becoming well known enough to where they could then, even the whites would allow them to practice on them. But then again, this leads to later on in the history where blacks were forbidden from being employed by physicians or apothecaries, and this was after there was this scare, this kind of overlooming fear of whites being poisoned by slaves. Don't know why that would have happened, but so due to that factor, and also some of them trying to cover their ass, right? Because one of these doctors might administer to someone incorrectly, that person gets worse or dies, and they just turn around and blame it on the Negro. Mm-hmm. You see? It was the niggers again. No, it's like...
It's crazy.
So, once again, the scapegoat. Couple that with fears and so on, it led to another law being created, this one in the Carolinas, where if a black person was found to be